It is our great pleasure and honor today to welcome Eitvydas Bajarūnas, who is a Lithuanian diplomat who has held various overseas postings, including being Lithuanian ambassador to the UK, Russia, and Sweden, being a non-resident ambassador to Portugal, Oman, and Uzbekistan, and consul general in St. Petersburg. He's also served as deputy ambassador at the Mission of Lithuania to NATO in Brussels, and held several top-level positions in the Lithuanian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. His work has been recognized by numerous state awards from Lithuania, Sweden, Estonia, and Portugal. He holds a master's degree in war studies from King's College London and has undertaken extensive education and training beyond that degree in issues in security and defense, in international relations, and in leadership. And he's currently a visiting fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis in Washington, D.C. He is widely published on topics on Russia's foreign and security policy, hybrid threats, and Baltic and Nordic security and defense, about which he will be speaking to us today. So please join me in welcoming Ambassador Bajarūnas.
First of all, thank you for pronouncing my name in 95% of accuracy, which is very rare. You can be Bajarūnas, and I remember at NATO, in the 90s, North Atlantic Cooperation Council, where all of us, our countries, would be part of the also NATO meetings. I was replacing my boss, ambassador, and then Secretary General of NATO, Xavier Solana, who spoke with heavy Spanish accent. He was inviting me to speak and Ambassador Bajarūnas, which was I'm not, but and I hear Bajarūnas. It's me. Okay. This was my first time to learn this. Your name. Not by this doesn't be correctly pronounced. It's more or less. So I not typically read from scripts, but I thought in order to be streamlined, I wrote a few elements here in my sort of improvised paper, and I will start with this. So we agreed with Johanna that I will do some intro, and then open for some questions until you die. So I will measure few topics which might be also for further sort of Q&A's investigation. So security threat landscape in the Baltic countries, how Trump's factor affecting us, how we cope with the military threats, how we cope with the hybrid threats, and a bit of Baltic view on Ukraine negotiation, or whatever it's called. This now continuous engagement between U.S., Ukraine, and Russia. So from the Baltic perspective, of course, Baltic, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, but always been under the sort of Russia's shadow, and this is what when we speak about security threat, we're not shying away. Many threats, one threat, it's Russia. But okay, you can associate Belarus to the threat element, but it's not existential threat to us. It's Russia. So from this perspective, of course, Russia was and is, and unfortunately it would continue to be our major security challenge. It's first of all military threats, because Russia's concentration of forces. We're so happy of NATO stepping into the Baltic region with more presence, and this is what we were always been dreaming. But if you calculate Russia's overall military sort of figures around Baltic region, it's enormously asymmetrically high. 100,000, 200,000. If you take all West Russia's military district, Kaliningrad, Pskov region, Leningrad region, Karelia, so it's really enormously high concentration. So of course, from this perspective, we are worried about military situation, and especially not only because of this asymmetry, but Russian rhetoric. which even in the 90s, there was one Russian political clown called Zhirinovsky. He would be proclaiming that we might go to Vilnius, we might go to Riga or Tallinn, but now all spectrum of Russia is, but there is still, now we have another clown of Russia, is Medvedev, but former president. But Russian rhetoric is very much Baltic countries are the next. You read horrifying stories of experts who say, okay, war over in Ukraine in one way or another, so Russia will regain power and the Baltics will be next round. And this is very much based not also about based on rhetoric. I've been to Russia, so I think I try to understand Russia. So Russia currently cannot move out of the war mood. There are hundreds, thousands, millions under arms, with those in front line, preparing for front line, or being on reserve. Russia's military industry is very much now backbone of Russia's economy. So if you, President Putin, what you should do? You don't think that all these million people will be back to your society? You know, guys from Buryatia, the Russian region, depressed region, they got a chance, good salary, to go to front line. Sometimes die, but this is their choice. So they will not come back to Buryatia with a 10 times less income. Of course, they would chase the war or adventures in Moscow or in the Russians. So of course, it's very dangerous for Putin. I'm not defending now, trying to stand on Putin's side, but I try to understand that there is logic of Putin to continue the war. And again, Baltics are Moldova as a sort of, if Ukraine would be badly hit by this war, Moldova, Georgia, but Baltics are the next. And this is why we still keep this very strong element in our security policy. This year is it's particularly important because we've been so close that the war might, or at least not war finally over, but at least the war over in the hot phase. I mean the ceasefire. So again, all the Russian troops which will be released from Ukraine front, they should be somewhere engaged. But also this year, Russia will host yet another Zapad exercise. Zapad is sort of continues Russia's showcases of Russia's military mindset and usually very hostile scenarios of occupying or partially occupying Baltic countries. So of course, this autumn, Vilnius will be under high alert. What might happen with the Russians and Belarusians in Kaliningrad and Belarus, and with this view of Suwalki corridor. I know how many of you know the Suwalki corridor? Fair enough, some people know. It's some key place. So, but those I calculated you to those knowing. So yeah, Suwalki gap. So that's definitely we need to take this into account. But apart from conventional Russian threats, is the hybrid threat. This is what my topic of expertise in CEPA in DC. All sort of spectrum of Russia's meddling into elections, so using energy as a leverage to the societal weakness of Baltic countries or economic disparities, which also contributes. So the more we have weakness, the more Russia have leverage to influence, to use this what is now called under this buzzword hybrid threats. But they are not uniquely 2014's Russia's Ukraine war invention. It's a hybrid threat under different names. They've been present with us during the Cold War. This KGB methods KGB, Russia's intelligence services methods to influence societies in the West, and all this Russian names as Maskirovka, deception, or others. They've been with us. But even from the Baltic, Lithuania perspective, we living next to Russia, we've always been under this asymmetrical or Russia's meddling into your affairs mode. Lithuania, Poland, the once upon a time biggest kingdom in Europe, we were facing in 18th century quite dire situation where our parliament, Sejm, was not able to join, Sejm, Polish Sejm, was not able to take decisions. And that was very simple, because decisions were made in using this liberal veto right. So when you are external forces wants to influence this kingdom, you don't need to bribe all nobilities. You need to bribe one or two Lithuanian Polish nobility, which was the case, and you paralyze the work of the parliament. So Lithuanian Polish parliament, Sejm, was not able to accept decisions for 70 years. So of course, how can you defend your country? How can you prepare to defend your country if you're not functional? Lithuania's or the Baltic annexation in 1940s also very much hybrid scenario under this name. 1940, Lithuania, again I will speak of Lithuania is forced to sign the non-aggression treaty with Soviet Union, whereby Russia placed some limited troops in Lithuania, but Russia started to influence over this short period political situation, demanding change of the ministers and so on. Of course, Russia was using fifth column, which was present, and dissatisfied people, which with the fall of the pre-war Lithuania's regime, which was called Smetona, President Smetona regime. Of course, you got quite a good fertile ground to influence the policies. So elections, electing parliament which declares interest to join Soviet Union. So typically, by books of 21st century, typical hybrid operation. So from the 10 years of Soviet Union investment to bring young Lithuanian journalists or officials to Soviet Union. Of course, in 1930s, when you go to Moscow, you have big green streets. You don't know what Stalin is doing behind. So you come to Kaunas, which was our pre-war capital, and say, "Oh, nice country. Why don't Lithuania join this one moment?" So typical influence operation, as we would call now. So hybrid threat, cyber, the influencing elections, propaganda, all these elements present. One element which we now diminished over the last years, energy security, which was for many years a big factor of the Baltic vulnerability. Because it's not only that Russia would control energy situation in our region with the investment, like Gazprom investment in Lithuania, or energy supply, but also Russia would use money invested into the Baltic countries, Lithuania, as a way to sponsor some political parties, some officials, and so on. So energy was like the channel of Russia's influence. I'm still on the first topic. Oh, I should do. How is it? 3 hours here?
Yes.
Then let's switch to the Trump factor, which is even more controversial. I think it's not a problem with Trump. Let's say it is not like we don't like him or don't like. The problem is that with the Baltic regaining independence in the 90s, Lithuania's Baltic affiliation with US became backbone of our security policy. That was based on several factors. One of them was because US was strongest factor in this Baltic showcase during the Cold War. This Baltic non-recognition policy, Wells Declaration of 1940s, where put the Baltics aside. Baltic embassies. I am surprising those who don't know that the Lithuanian embassy, physically, embassy of the Republic of Lithuania was operational during the Cold War, with the ambassador present, and even with the embassy issuing passport of the Republic of Lithuania, which would say valid everywhere except Soviet Union, which was very strange. But US 1960s, the Cold War at the height, and you would have American president would issue a declaration on the day of Lithuania's independence. Lithuanians, congratulations! One day Lithuania will be regained independence. So for Lithuanians, this American sort of support for independence was always remarkably important. And of course, the military factor. Again, I know, but many Lithuanians know the same Russian. For Russia, NATO membership of Baltics was quite a big problem, and they were fighting against, and this was I devoted the first part of my career of bringing Lithuania into NATO. But NATO, not as NATO, was Russia's sort of irritation. Boots on the ground, American boots on the ground. Yesterday we had a big event in Vilnius, which is still remarkable. The new Chancellor of Germany, Merz, was present in Vilnius, inaugurating German brigade, which will be operational in Lithuania. Very happy, and this is for many Lithuanians, it's like a 200 years Grand Duchy of Lithuania fighting against German crusaders. And then again, many other things which are not very happy in our relation with Germany. And suddenly, Lithuanians are welcoming Germany, come. It is something. But again, apart from German, which will be multinational brigade, Germany have now brigade in battalion in Lithuania, which have the Dutch, other components, Croatian, Belgium, French, but we want American, and this is what Lithuania's calculus. We need American. That's why two American battalions placed near Vilnius is a big factor for deterring Russia. We don't know how they will fight, where, on which conditions, but they are here, and this is the factor of life. That's why when we got President Trump, of course, for the Baltics, it was a big problem. No, not only this, signals of NATO, non-NATO, we need NATO, I will defend you, I will not defend you. This leakage of the documents, which was, I think, last month from Pentagon, where, this new doctrine appearing that NATO, America will not automatically defend countries. And then, of course, the story with treating Zelensky, Ukraine's case, very actually different. Not to be try to be on diplomatic sort of stance, very differently. Sometimes in February, March, which was peak of this mess in this American policy with Ukraine, you don't understand reading American media or listening to Trump whether Ukraine occupied Russia or Russia occupied Ukraine. And that was also a big factor. Of course, the treatment of Zelensky in Oval Office, and actually in this Oval Office of February, this event also was very important for Lithuania as a Baltic military, this American support. Trump was answering to the question about Poland. He said, okay, Poland definitely will support Poland, Baltic countries. And then the face changed. Difficult neighborhood. Okay, but we will support Poland. So even rhetorically, for many Baltics was, what? We didn't hear this clear cut. We got President Bush 2002, right after the Prague summit of NATO, which invited 10 countries, including Lithuania, to join NATO, which happens in 2 years, in 2004. President Bush was in Vilnius, and he said, from today, enemy of Lithuania, enemy of the United States of America, period. And that's what for many Lithuanians, this was a buzzword. This is America. Even Biden, coming to NATO summit in Vilnius 23, he repeated, every inch of Lithuanian territory will be defended, period. And suddenly you hear, difficult neighborhood. Are we defended? Can we trust? But of course, we should criticize Trump, we should be unhappy, but the life is life. There are no replacement of American defense in Europe. European Union, I will address this as well. American Union being more and more anticipated, emancipated, there is a more and more understanding that we should take lead on European defense, us, European countries. This is very right, but so far we can't replace Americans. We need American presence, we need American support for NATO, but all the signals of American troops withdrawal from Europe is really much sending signal to Moscow. Time wait a moment, and then time will come. Your time will come. And this is exactly why the Baltics. I wrote for SIPA small piece about this uneasy Baltic policy. So I started that Baltic officials asked how you assess this current situation. They say very bad, but I will not comment officially. Very, very bad. Of course, it was very bad, but we should be either panicking or not. So I think this we have the prominent Latvian participant here, Taulis, who I think you spoke here the day before. I like your title. Baltics are not panicking.
Something you don't have.
Don't panic. Exactly. This is what we've been in much more difficult situation. If Baltics would be panicking in 1990s, where we were aspiring to become regain independence, and there was nobody who was welcoming us. Contrary, there were signals on the Baltic countries, stay calm. You don't contribute to worsening situation with the Soviet Union. Let's support Gorbachev. The situation was much more worse. We had the KGB controlling our borders. We have Russian Soviet army present in the Baltics. Our energy economic situation was tightly knit with Soviet Union. But our policy was then okay. Let's have this factor in front of us, but let's continue with NATO policies, with NATO membership. In '95, when I ended up as a deputy ambassador to NATO in Brussels, an experienced Baltic diplomat. I was just finishing my mathematical studies and becoming a diplomat, and a small reception, and I see, with a glass of wine, I see oldish guy. I came to him and said, "How are you? Where are you from? Baltics, Balkans?" I explained, not Baltics. Baltics. What is it? I'm American admiral. Oh, nice. I'm next American admiral. So where is Lithuania's? Where is your stance on NATO? I want to join. Kidding? What kidding? No. You are. What is it again? Lithuania. You cannot join NATO. This is not Russia, not Putin, not Yeltsin. It was American admiral. You will not join NATO in any circumstances. That was why? Because either NATO would be different, OSCE type talk show. But you as former Soviet Union, you cannot join NATO. So I remember I said, look, but I will explain with all your sincere answer. President Brazauskas in '94, I was explaining Lithuanian stance, wrote a letter to Secretary General Gordon that Lithuania want to join NATO. Yes. So this is my policy. Yes. Okay, I listen to your advice, but this is my stance. So the same now. We can criticize Trump, we can be unhappy, but our stance is we need American in Europe, period. And we should not advertise, okay, America. But of course, we should work in parallel with European Union, with our allies in Europe, to have more European defense issue to be on the high level. Of course, first of all, individually to contribute to higher defense spending. And here, of course, the Baltics, as always, with Poland became leading NATO and European Union forces, investing or pledging our investment from existing now around 3% to more than 5%. We of course started to knit very good network with our neighbors, Nordic countries and others. But in EU never been with this European defense was always very badly bad concept. We thought when we joined NATO, European Union, when we joined NATO EU, more or less the same period. For me, like for Lithuania, I had this standing instruction from Vilnius. Whenever French, usually French, would raise this Grand Armée, European, my answer was no. This is NATO. European Union should concentrate on business, economy. We have another business, another many more issues. Environment, standards of agriculture, phytosanitary, not defense. Okay, the European Union can contribute into the crisis management. This is where European Union became quite famous. border management mission to Georgia, Moldova, and so on, but not defense. We can't accommodate 2 European defense structures. It's NATO. That's why we were killing the baby on ourselves. We were throwing this water with the baby, saying, no, European. And suddenly, we need European defense. Not as a separate to NATO, but as a European contribution to overall security situation, to NATO. But not waiting when America will say to us, or when America, we need for our sake. We suddenly realized that we have shortage of ammunition. Suddenly we calculated that Russia, which is 20 times economically smaller than the European Union, produce more than us armaments. So this is not the situation we should welcome. We need to change. And that's why it's symbolically that in parallel to the Estonian foreign minister of the European Union, Kallas, commissioner for external affairs, we got Lithuanian former Prime Minister Andrius Kubilius, commissioner for defense and cosmos. It is symbolic that the Estonian lady contributes to the European Union external actions, and Lithuanian former Prime Minister contributes with his knowledge of Russia to the defense issues. Again, not as against NATO, not in ruining NATO, but contributing to NATO with less lip service, more with the capabilities. And this was always Lithuania's and Baltic and Central European reaction to the French, yet another French initiative. We don't need army separate from NATO. We need capability. We need more acting units. We need more units which will be not in paper ready to go, but in principle to go to the war in case of the need. So this is as far as the Trump, but I'm eager to answer to more questions. Of course, militarily, I already explained, we contribute with our defense spending. We started to buy more. We started to buy even more American. Lithuania's now purchase list from US is quite big. It's HIMARS, ATACMS, Apache, and it would grow in parallel with balanced Lithuania's acquisition policy vis-à-vis Europe. We have Germans in Lithuania. Of course, we need to have more German gadgets, including Leopard tanks, because they need to fight. They need to fight together with Germans. Of course, it would be very strange. Of course, we have Nordic defense industry. Lithuanians buy from Sweden. And this is where another, apart from NATO, EU, another important element of Lithuania's Baltic security is our neighborhood. We are now part of Nordic Baltic family, and we should benefit from this. Thanks to Putin, many good things happens in the Baltic region thanks to Putin. Lithuania's energy independence and Swedish membership and Finnish membership to NATO. I was 2011, 2016 Lithuania's ambassador to Sweden, and NATO had this, and still has this concept of NATO counterpoint embassy. One of NATO embassy in some countries will act as a NATO information hub. So colleagues, knowing my passion to security, advised me, and Lithuania's embassy in Sweden, 2013-14, we were acting as a NATO counterpoint embassy. Swedish debate on NATO was more or less at the very high level, because Russia, around the Crimea's crisis period and annexation of Crimea, started to have more nasty things to do in Baltic Sea. So Swedish public opinion started to shift whether they should also discuss possibly joining NATO. But 2013-14 discussions finished that they cannot join NATO. Public opinion was not enough. Political consensus, and a Swedish consensus-based country, they was not yet up to join NATO, and they were thinking to join NATO with Finland. So Sweden, country which was icon of European non-alignment case. Last war, Sweden was fighting. This was still Napoleonic period, where under the king, newly elected king, the Bernadotte, Sweden was fighting the last war in Europe, and then decided to. So more than 200 years of non-alignment. Thanks to Mr. Putin, Sweden decided to join. So now, of course, with the Finnish and Swedish membership, Baltic capability military capability in the region increased enormously. Not only Finnish big reserve forces, Swedish maritime assets, which was lacking. We have the only among the Baltic countries submarines as part of Swedish defense, and coordination between our countries. So that brought us in line of cooperation. But of course, Lithuania have very strong Polish access. Defense of Suwałki will not be implemented by Lithuania. We have Polish troops near Suwałki. We have American brigade on Polish side. So definitely these regional networks are equally important. There are a few more elements. Lithuania decided, and I think this concentrated regional attempt was, we withdrew from Ottawa Convention. Any Canadians, not offending Canada was Ottawa. Ottawa Convention anti-personnel mines. Very important milestone of humanitarian treatment of the war. But Baltic, Central Europe, we decided to withdraw because we need to defend Lithuania. We need to prepare for the war. This is also was contribution. And now switching to my last small piece about Ukraine. Of course, when there is a criticism on President Trump, what he do with Ukrainian negotiations, I always sort of say, but he created some sort of dynamism. Ukraine was, Ukraine was lacking clear-cut Western mission. What is the end goal? If you would ask Lithuanian, Latvian, Estonian, of course, we want Ukraine to win. But unfortunately, our rhetoric was more or less okay. Our support for Ukraine, I mean Western support, NATO EU support was okay. But we were not giving Ukraine enough weaponry to win the war. So that's why this situation was really stuck. So I say yes, it's fact that there is a President Trump who's decided to get a bit of more dynamism in this situation. But of course, this is everything which was until now was not moving in the direction which we would very much welcome. First of all, of course, this territorial integrity of Ukraine. We thought this is sacred, and this whole discussion that the Crimea might be recognized, or even other regions might be recognized. It's of course we will not protest because there are no elements to protest. But of course we will not welcome, and we will never, under any circumstances, we would recognize international. I think more or less the whole EU, with some exceptions, you might know which countries. but and this is also a very clear-cut policy. We will not welcome this situation that under the war circumstances, Russia have gained territories and even territory recognized. Actually, this Baltic non-recognition by US policy is shown as an example. So when Ukraine will regain Crimea, we don't know, but it might regain in the future. And this was the Baltic case. Again, 60s, US president I was referring would say, Lithuania, you one day will be independent. Nobody believed probably, even among Lithuanians. Okay, probably, but this is what you need. You need to have non-recognition policy, and you need to have in your heart. So this was our advice to Ukrainians. Don't concentrate now on regaining Crimea. Think of the future. Get into this situation now, somehow with less sort of wounds, and then you will regain. Of course, we would welcome as soon as possible Ukraine joining the EU. This was again thanks to this war. Before 2022, the Ukrainian membership to European Union aspirations were always very much unwelcome by many European countries. They said, no, not now, in the future. But war started, and one of the first things EU did was recognition of Ukraine right to join the European Union. And this is, again, opens quite an important avenue for Ukraine to be a normal European country, which we wish. If you ask Baltic and Polish, definitely we will answer that the only security guarantee is NATO membership. We know that situation now is not right. There will be no consensus among NATO to for Ukraine to join NATO, but we cannot delete this. Like in the Baltic case, this was no. If you would listen to Russians, less aggressive, but also quite forcefully against Baltic NATO membership, you would end up in the same situation that the Baltics will be somewhere in the gray zone. NATO membership perspective for Ukraine is not like a irritating factor, but it's like a security guarantee. So definitely we need, of course, what is lacking in this, my understanding in this current Ukraine non-negotiations is European voice. It's coming. It's after the famous February's meeting of first time Russian and American delegation in Riyadh. Europe, wake up. We are not invited. We are not. But why Americans should invite you? We don't have even voice. We don't have a clear policy. That's why it took some time, but it's coming. Europe should come with a more clear-cut our stance, not asking Americans, of course, in coordination with Americans. But we need to have European perspective on how we see this war ended in Ukraine. This is coming, as I said, but it's sometimes big things in Europe are done by crisis. European funds to support countries devastated after COVID came without any odds of European regulations, and if we would be discussing under previous EU regulations US funds of post-COVID funds, we would continue for still 10 years. And so this current situation requires enormous creativity to take decisions now, not to wait until. Of course, we need to respect EU law, we have the regulations, but we need to overcome. The same with Ukraine. We need, as a Europe, to be more forceful. Majority of the Russian reserve funds money, which is around 300 billion USD, is in European banks. Europe, without European support, Americans will not be able to lift sanctions. So we have many leverage as European Union, and we should keep them, and we should come into the perspective of negotiation. So I think I will finish with this. Happy to answer to all your questions.
So if I could just ask you to identify yourself before posing your question.
My name is Aistė. I'm from Lithuania.
Sounds very Lithuanian.
Yeah, but I have a
But
question.
please don't ask nasty questions. Why?
No, I wanted to ask about the draft, the situation for any, young males getting drafted into the army, what that looks like now, what that is likely to evolve into from your perspective. And then my second question is, how is the government preparing, Lithuanians that might not get drafted into the war for this very real possibility of war?
So second question, how Lithuania?
Oh, so how the Lithuanian government is preparing the population, are there any measures that are going into place kind of for individuals that might not get drafted if the war were to, break out, but that would still need to be prepared for this possibility?
It's very strange with this conscription system. So I probably concentrate on Lithuania, but similar cases in the Baltic countries. So with the regain independence, of course, our budgets were small. The Baltic countries, contrary to the other Soviet republics, which of course Lithuania, we didn't recognize ourselves part of Soviet Union, but still we were formally part of Soviet Union. So Baltic case was very different. All other countries, for example Ukraine, they had Soviet army in their territory. They did recognize this as a Ukrainian army. The same happens in all republics. And we were wondering why 2014 was so unsuccessful for Ukraine. It's easy, because you didn't have a loyal Ukrainian army. You have a bunch of thousands of soldiers, but many of them, even some of them were double citizenship, Russian affiliated. So Baltic case was a bit different, but also very, very informative. Our Baltic stance, Lithuania stance was all Russian troops present in Lithuania's territory at the moment of declaration of independence are subject of withdrawal. We do not pretend to any sort of buy anything from Russia. take it, everything, and withdraw, because this is occupational army. Our stance was, this is occupational army. The price for this very arrogant Lithuanian policy was not arrogant, it's the right policy, but that we got zero. So everything was created from the scratch. So you need to buy guns, you need to have equipment, you need to train. So, but around 2000, when Lithuania was, this aspiration to join NATO was coming to the surface, we suddenly realized that starting from the scratch is good. We didn't have this bad heritage. Many Lithuanian institutions, police have a heritage from Soviet Union, many others. Lithuanian army, suddenly 2000, we realized we have so many Lithuanian, but also this was case of Latvia, Estonia, English speaking. You go to Poland, and only few commanders would speak English. Lithuanians have, some of them would go to, underwent to operations with Danes in Amprofor, former Yugoslavia, and then with NATO operations in ex-Yugoslavia, then Iraq, Afghanistan. So this was strength of small but strong. And then of course when you have small forces, what you do, you try to have, using a Nordic model, but also not uniquely Nordic, this national guards or the territorial defense forces, as it was in the Nordic countries, to expand them. So this was around the time of NATO membership, small Lithuanian army, well trained, even with NATO's experience of NATO missions, also the reserve forces. When we joined NATO, I remember talking with even American experts. They say, look, if war starts, hopefully not, and we're coming to rescue you, to fight in Lithuania. Actually, American doctrines, if anything moving target, we will shoot. Lithuania reserve forces or whatever, sorry to say. So what do you mean? So concept was around to join NATO, we do not need Lithuanian reserve forces. Why? NATO's, first of all, defense concept was different, but also NATO's security situation was, where's NATO around 2000, after September 11? What is NATO's security interest? In Afghanistan, in Middle East, fighting against international terrorism, against Islamic fundamentalism, against. So when these concepts changed, so Lithuania started to concentrate into niche perspective, and that's sort of shrink our interest to invest into the reserve forces. Crimea, Eastern Ukraine. Remember who was the first to counter Russians in Eastern Ukraine? Volunteers, actually Russian-speaker volunteer battalions, Azov and others. And suddenly, even in NATO, said, oh my God, you need Lithuania. We have a defense plan on you, but you need to have more reserve forces. You have on your own. So this concept has changed. We established this concept system, and now we are on the verge to prepare reserve forces. And for me, the role model is Finland. I've been ambassador to Sweden. Finnish total defense concept in the Cold War was similar. Small armies, very dedicated, but majority is reserve forces. You have this concept, and this prepares your reserve. Finland, but Sweden completely disbanded the system. Finland retained. So imagine if you are a Russian defense planner. In the first days of the war, Finland can mobilize 250,000 troops. It's not like a paper. Those who've been in the Soviet Union, which I was, this Soviet Union reserve forces, Soviet Union would invite some guys, they would be in the barracks, drink vodka, and then go home. No, Finland was trained forces. So in first days, in 1 week, Finland would contribute 1 million fighting forces. Of course, when you're Russian, you would think twice. And of course, swamps and very sort of very defensible, well terrain of Finland. So of course, for Lithuania, this is role model, and that's why a lot of Nordic Baltic cooperation along this line. Reserve forces, prepare mobilized forces. When war will come, until someone will come to rescue us, hopefully, we need to have the strategic depths, what even Ukraine had. Vilnius is strategic governance. So Vilnius, with a big push from the Russian forces, Vilnius might be taken in 1 hour. Of course, we need to have, thanks God, we have American next to us, next to Vilnius. But we need to have Lithuanians who will be first defense echelon. Now with the drones, with the javelins fighting from the corners. So we need to have like to become really untasty for Russia. This is the deterrence, untasty to occupy. Okay, Baltic countries. Okay, if you're a Russian player, you go and with massacres. So this is what I think now this new concept. Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, we all are contributing to this efforts. Preparation to the war. And this is I think. Remember when war started 22 in Ukraine and President Zelensky was criticized because although there was quite a massive release of American British intelligence about Russian troops near the Russian border, preparing ourselves that Russia might eventually start the war against Ukraine, but still President Zelensky was saying no, there are no threats. Because he was very much caring about Ukraine, about stability, about don't threaten investors to go out of Ukraine. The same in Lithuania. Of course, we don't want to go into this panic mood because then it will be end of the Baltic defense, Lithuanian defense. We will be panicking. We need to have real clear-cut assessment what is currently, and we need to have a good sharing of intelligence information with our allies. And we need silently, but in quite a speedy way, to prepare for the war, which might be not Belarus entering the crossing border, might be with some hybrid elements, with Russia creating some tension near Narva or Vilnius, and using the situation. Unfortunately, we have still massive presence of Russian speakers, which some of them are loyal, some of them are not to the countries. That's why we might expect in quite different scenarios of this war, which will not be the February of 22 in Ukraine.
The inequality that is developed in America has unsettled our political practices and alliances. It is a good thing that the European Union is starting to respond to building up its own defense industry. However, the interesting thing is the Ukrainians, in fighting the Russians, have developed a new form of warfare with their drones and those application to much bigger forces and numbers. Are the Baltic countries doing something studying these kind of military problems and doing something about applying this new kind of warfare because they are smaller, Russia's bigger, and with what's going on in America and NATO now, I think it's good to trust but develop your own forces as much as possible.
I think Ukraine, because of our affinity, because our engagement, political interests, and also philosophy. For many Lithuanians, the war in Ukraine is not foreign war, happening somewhere. If you are in Vilnius, of course we're not yet as a country, we're part of NATO, we're not part of the war. But for many Lithuanians, this is our war, what happened in Ukraine. So philosophically, there is very strong affiliation. This is the first. Second, there are many layers of this experience sharing. There are many Lithuanian volunteers organizations. One of them, Blue Yellow, very iconic organization of the former Swedish paratrooper. In the 90s came to Lithuania, fell in love with this freedom-loving country, Lithuania, and he now, Jonas Erlu, he established an organization, Blue Yellow, which from 2014 was trying to supply Ukrainians using this crowdfunding or charity support, supply with the needed equipment. And there are many more organizations. When you're in Vilnius, you speak with your friends. Some Lithuanians are in Facebook posting, I have a battalion under my support, and they need 2 trucks or 2 jeeps. Get some money. So there's a lot of Lithuanian. In Vilnius, you feel really this Ukrainian presence very close. But from professional angle, of course, it's must for us to think of Ukraine as a, I don't want to use this word, it's politically incorrect, laboratory. Ukraine is a laboratory because people are dying. So it is not a laboratory, it's the war. It's Ukraine defending their country and dying for this. But of course, when you're in the Baltics, it's very much, so we have many Lithuanians who go to frontline to study. We have many Ukrainians in Lithuania sharing experience. We have some Lithuanians fighting for Ukraine, coming back with the Lithuanian experience. Lithuania and other Baltic countries suddenly became quite a players in defense industry, drones, lasers, other gadgets. Everything is tested in the war, everything. There is no Lithuanian organization which go to the European market and say, we have new lasers. No, these lasers are 20 times going to and from. Ukraine said, oh bullshit, it's not good. Oh, Russians already established anti-drones for your drones. Think twice. So this is enormous flow of experience, and because even actually Ukrainians are telling the same. Don't buy this 2022 this narrative that Russian army is weak, and Ukraine is saying Russian army now is much more profound level, organizationally and technically. Ukrainians are saying that every new drone is produced, Lithuania, not Lithuania, everywhere, in the front line, next day receive anti-drones waves. So you need to have, and they say, yes, Ukrainians would say, we think that Russians have scientists, experts on the front line. And this is new war about. You need to have not only soldiers, but also experts on the front line who would correct every day, on annual basis, on daily basis, to correct this. So experience sharing is very much of now unavoidable.
Thank you so much. My name is Haren Mouri. I am American, Swedish, Iranian, member of community. And your talks are wonderful. I was thinking that if you forget about what Trump said, crazy stuff, there is a truth behind everything. That China has already won over US because that US is carrying Europe and standing for a lot of expenses, even still giving the free service to many of the things that they offered from Second World War. And at the same time, European countries all the time criticizing, because I have watched 20 years in Sweden, the news, the homelessness and everything, laughing at American, and why they don't even contribute to their code that they have offered, they were supposed to do during decades. And I have seen the Ukraine as a slap on the face of Europe, but still Europe don't wake up. What is your suggestion? Because in this situation, Europe needs put at least between 5 to 8% of the national for the defense of the Europe, and don't be sitting on top of the shoulder of the US anymore. US cannot carry the Europe and fight against also China. It has already lost to China. And what is your suggestion about taking more responsibility for Europe? Because after 3 years,
you answered my question. We need to have more European investment in defense and strategic understanding. I mean, there was a
2%, but needs 8%.
Absolutely,
Already.
It's coming. You know, I think as always in various situations, you cannot blame one side, Europe or America. I think it was, post World War II, America coming to Europe with a Marshall Fund, and there was a sort of notion, Europe develop, establish peace, post-European, post-war situation. We support you, we will defend you, and that continued. But there was a moment, I think after World War II, end of Cold War, where Europe would be saying, thank America, we will take on our own. But then, of course, there was this peaceful dividend period, nobody thought about defense, And then actually Americans were, I was criticizing some unrealistic French ideas, but they were also Americans. They say, look, Europe, don't invest into defense. Defense is NATO. And that was, so I think there was both to blame. Now we are in a situation which is America withdrawing from Europe, not tomorrow, but they will withdraw. Interest is go to China, people to China, and we as Europe, not tomorrow, but we need now to think about ourselves, about Ukraine, how we should take, not in the current situation of the war, post-war recovery of Ukraine. This should be on us. Defense of Europe, this should be on us. In coordination as much as possible with NATO, with America, but this should be on us. And that's why suddenly Europe, which is enormous size of if manpower even in the army, suddenly we realize we don't have strategic lifting. We have America, we have troops in our territory, it's fine, but we don't have strategic lifting. We don't have strategic intelligence. We only have developed now European Union Galileo satellites, but not enough to have strategic intelligence. And suddenly we realize we do not have similar type of the anti-air defense like Patriots. And this is suddenly Europe like a big army, many manpower, but we cannot even defend ourselves. That's why I think this, as I said, I'm not always saying Trump is doing everything bad. This kickoff to to Europe is the right thing to do. And this is exactly the moment to do. But of course, what we would demand from Americans, not to do this in this drastic way. Okay, tomorrow we withdraw. We might negotiate some, transitional period, because if Europe is left on our own, Russia is aggressive, winning the war against Ukraine, there will be quite a risky situation in Europe. That's why I agree of Europe to take lead, but we should have a bit more space to transition to this period, because that's not what you do with Patriot type of asset. You cannot do this tomorrow. It's investment, it's production, and
Last one. Most of you are sitting around, so let's maybe take one more quick question if anybody has one.
I try to be in quick answer, which is not easy.
Sorry, quick question. Okay. The little green man, the taking over of the Crimea, was done very differently than an invasion. How well protected do you think the Baltic states are now against a similar kind of tactic, whereby ununiformed, but everybody knew who they really were, filtering in, affecting the democratic or the parliament or whatever, in no small part because so many of the Crimeans were Russian-speaking, and 20% or so of the Baltics are Russian speakers. So what is being prepared against a kind of Crimea tactic?
This exactly falls under the chapter which I was mentioning briefly, hybrid defense. But of course it's much wider. First of all, Crimea was very specific because Russians have had troops in Crimea under the legal status. The Russian troops were not coming, they simply were in the units in Crimea. That was unfortunately Ukrainian trust to Russia, or enforced trust that there were Russian units. So they simply went out of the units, of course, in this identified mode. But in Lithuania and the Baltic countries, this is very much now on our defense concept, to prepare for all this type of operations. Small identified group crossing Belarusian or Russian border with Latvia and leading towards Daugavpils. They should be met with our forces, with the police, with the volunteers, and you name it. And we need to coordinate. So we, first of all, are not only develop a concept, but we do these exercises along the line. Not massive Russian invasion, which is, we're doing this with NATO, this exercise, but also we do national, regional exercises exactly along this period. So the preparation is awareness of this crisis, in putting them into the doctrines, but also testing in practice, in exercising this. And this goes actually every day, all this type of exercises with all these hybrid scenarios. Because with hybrid scenarios, the whole difficulty is that it's very difficult to identify, there are a lot of ambiguity, and that's why you need to have more practice, more prepared. So literally, we have special troops ready if anyone crossing border to react, and we need to have also the awareness of the population that if you are in your village, you see some unidentified soldiers or men, you need to know whom to call or how to react. So all this creates network of which would counter this type of operations.
All right. So thank you so much for coming.